Hey there, my cordial folk. We're doing another cordial stream, and I'm excited to be streaming again. I'm excited to be paddling through this fruit flavored syrup on the intertubes, and to be writing some stuff. Modern Cordial is my name, and on my show, I write stories live. Though in this case, we're going to be trying to edit something. There's a little something I cooked up earlier. Little flagon of cordial that I've pre-mixed for your beverageering pleasure. It's about Jackson space boots. Rhaegar in the live chat says, nice to have you back, Martin. Where have you been all this time? Well, the cordial, it keeps on flowing. It's never not flowing, whether you see it or not. Sometimes the cordial is underground. It's not obvious. It's not always some Niagara Falls loudly and ostentatiously roaring across the landscape. Sometimes it's it's little underwater trickle, like the salty flows that make the stalactites and the stalagmites and all the other stalactites under the ground. So I've been cordialing away, and I want to do more Jackson space boots because I like Jackson space boots. I think she's got a lot of potential, and she's got a big galaxy out there to explore. But I think before she can properly embark, I think we need to do a little bit of groundwork to figure out who this Jackson Space Boots character is. And so I've been thinking about her past, and I've been thinking about what makes her who she is. And so I've written a bit of like a flashback to her past and to some formative moments that I think inform who she is today. And like the whole Jackson Space Boots vibe, I want it to be pretty lighthearted. I want it to be fun and colorful. I want people to be having a good time. The characters to largely be having a good time, because like I'm so sick of overly serious, pretentious work that's about serious ideas. That means that everyone's always unhappy all the time, and they say fuck a lot, and they shoot each other with guns. That's not the tone I want for Jackson Space Boots. And one of the problems with this flashback prequel story that we've got here is that it does verge a little bit too close to that tone than I'm entirely comfortable with. There is a bit too much that's serious in here, maybe. But maybe she needs that. Maybe she needs a little bit of that seriousness and that darkness to sort of form part of her character. So I'm gonna just go through what we've got of this flashback so far, and my goal is to edit it as we go along. And if you all have got suggestions or questions as we go along, you're welcome to drop them in the live chat. And we'll try and figure out who this Jackson character is together. So there's a lot that I don't like about what we got so far. I think it's a bit too serious. I think it's a little too edgy. I think, and it's early days, but I want to finish it. So it's called Jackson's Nightmare, and it starts with something wet ran down her wrist. Jackson realized she was clenching her fists so hard that her fingernails had punctured her palm. She opened her trembling hands, and a drop of blood fell to the floor. In the low gravity, it drifted down slow, like a red snowflake, glittering. "Hey," said Merc. "Don't freak out." The mercenary was standing across from her in the back of the truck. To steady himself in the moving vehicle, he held on to straps on the walls meant to secure cargo, with his arms outstretched, like a spider on a web. "You can stay in the vehicle," he said. "We'll handle this. We're professionals." Merc tried to smile, but only managed a creepy curl of the lip on his eerily smooth, glossy face. After what he described as a minor ballistic incident a few months back, Merc had his face regrown, and the new skin was still too raw and stiff to emote properly. It looked as though the face of a baby had been grafted onto a man's body, which, for all she knew, it had. Merc's eerie gaze. Yeah, I've said eerie twice, haven't we? Yeah, we won't use eerie twice. What about Merc's empty gaze? Or Merc's stark gaze, or I don't know, piercing gaze is too obvious. I think what's scary about Merc is that he's sort of a bit inhuman. He's like he's described like a spider or like an animal or like a predator. Like he's something that isn't quite human. So I'd like to convey that with his gaze somehow. I mean, you know, I could just say Merc's animal gaze or Merc's predator gaze. What's that word for like impassive is a word that might work. Like something that has no feeling in it, like an emotionless gaze. Like he regarded her with insect eyes or something. I don't know. Not sure what to do with that just yet. But Merc's gaze made Jackson shiver with dread. Oh yeah, we're here, aren't we? Made her shiver with dread. This was a man who would do evil things without question, and for surprisingly affordable prices. But monsters had stolen her brother, Tiller, and she needed a monster to help get him back. "I'm coming in," Jackson said, trying to sound confident. "Tiller needs to see me. He knows me. He won't go with strangers." "Of course," Merc replied. It was hard to tell with his mask-like face, but he didn't seem to be taking her seriously. His face looked fresh and new, but his voice was a ragged rumble, and his eyes were yellowed and flecked with age. And so the idea is that this guy's gotten his face severely injured or disfigured in a fight or something. And so, using some science fiction technology, he's regrown his face. And so, it's really creepy that his face is all pale and new, but the rest of him is old and rough. But it occurred to me that, like, if, you know, like we said that he can't smile properly because, like, the muscles and the skin aren't quite functioning yet. But if that's the case, it would be very difficult to speak. If your face was like inoperable to the point where you couldn't smile, then I think you'd have a lot of trouble speaking. So I've sort of ridden myself into a bind there. I want to sort of say that he's got like a speech impediment as well, because if your face is paralyzed, you'd sort of talk like this. If you can't move your lips. You can't say like B and M and P, like the sounds that have your lips together. So I think I should specify that like those are the sounds that Merc struggles with. But also I don't want to go into that rabbit hole necessarily. I'm trying to be concise here. Because the emotional core of what's going on here is that Jackson is trying to save her brother Tiller, which we're getting into. Because Jackson said, "I told you, Tiller is different to other people. You need to be patient with him. Don't yell, don't touch him. Just let me talk and he'll come with us." Jackson stopped before her voice started quavering. She kept seeing Tiller in her mind's eye, crying out from her from some cold cell. She couldn't bear to think that she wasn't there for him when he needed her. "Whatever you need, hon," said Merc's second-in-command. Darcy, her name was. She was comfortably reclining atop a stack of empty packing boxes. Last night they dumped the truck's cargo so they could smuggle themselves in instead. We'll get in and get out with your brother before they even know we're here. Jackson liked Darcy better than Merc, but not by a whole lot. Darcy had a special visor wired into her optic nerves so she could see heat and movement and ultraviolet from a mile away, but Jackson was pretty sure Darcy was using it to see her naked. As well as Merc and Darcy, there were the twins, Renner and Lendomir. Renner stood next to Merc in the back of the truck, while Len was in the front, driving their stolen vehicle across the dusty red moon. Len probably wasn't licensed to drive a truck on an unsealed road on a low-gravity moon, but it's not like there was any traffic to crash into, so they couldn't get lost. There was just one road on the whole moon, and it ran straight from the port to their destination. And maybe that'd be a good place to note that, like, they really are in the middle of nowhere here. This moon isn't even on most maps. It's a footnote. What's, like paper towns? You've probably heard of that. There's like this whole thing back in, back before Google Maps and before the ubiquity of digital maps. Maps were sold on paper by corporations that wanted to protect their intellectual property. They wanted to protect their ownership of the map. And one of the ways that they'd do that is that they would deliberately put inaccurate, fake, false details into their maps. So they'd create what's called a paper town, where they would put a town on the map that doesn't exist. They just make it up. They'd say, this is Rock Town, and it's in the middle of Massachusetts, and it's there, but it's not. And the reason that they did that was that if some rival map company tried to steal their content, tried to steal their intellectual property, and tried to sell that company's maps as their own, the company would look for their made-up paper town. And if that made-up paper town was on another company's map, they'd be able to say, aha, you just copied your map from our map because we put that made-up town there. So I love that idea of that sort of, non-existent place. And, there's, you can imagine, or there's probably stories where, like, maybe some non-existent paper town became a real town. Like, what if you made up a fictional invented town along a, long highway in the middle of nowhere? People might want to go there. Like, if you, needed gas, if you were on a long trip in the middle of nowhere and you needed to go somewhere to get supplies, you might look on the map and see this paper town and think, well, shit, I better go there. And you might go there and find nothing. But some intrepid business person might think, well, there's no town here, but it's on the map. If I put a gas station here, people would actually buy my services because there's a town on the map. And so by inventing a fake fictional place, you might inadvertently create a real place, like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like in Borges wrote a story called Talon Akbar Orbis Tertius about fictional places becoming real by our interest in them, or by our obsession with fictional places. We create those fictional places. And that's kind of what ideology is, or any kind of like goal-motivated behavior. We are bringing things from fiction into reality. And the only way to get anything done, the only way to get anything difficult done is by believing in something, right? That's what they always say. You got to believe in yourself. You got to believe in your ideals. You got to believe in your values. You got to believe in your dream. And it's by our belief in the unreal that the unreal becomes real. And maybe a paper town can be an example of that. None of which has anything to do with what we're talking about right now, so we can get back to the story. The truck hit a bump in the road, and the mercenaries thunked against the truck's interior, heavy with their gear. We said truck twice. We could change that. I mean, we could just change it to the truck hit a bump in the road and the mercenaries thunked against the interior. That's all it needs to be. Heavy with their gear. They all wore heavy polymer armor, black boots, and belts worn with years of hard use. I think I might use that term later instead. But no guns. Jackson had insisted on that as a condition of their deal. She didn't want anyone hurt, didn't want anyone else to lose their brother. And so Merc had given them non-lethal stun devices, what he called a sleeper. The sleepers looked like clunky old hair dryers, a shiny plastic chassis with a heavy battery attached. They projected a magnetic field that could overload a person's nervous system, harmlessly knocking them out for an hour or so, long enough for the team to get in and then escape with Tiller. Jackson had practiced with her sleeper last night. Arm, point, fire. Tiller comes home, and no one gets hurt. And right away, I'm sort of thinking, I don't want this to be about guns. I don't want Jackson's space boots to be some serious, grim world that's all about people shooting people. I don't want that. But there's a small amount of sort of gun violence going on here in order to give Jackson a particular dislike for gun violence. So what's going to happen is that, this unsavory mercenary has provided these non-lethal stun weapons to everyone. But spoilers, it's going to turn out that those weapons aren't so non-lethal at all, as it turns out. And someone's going to get hurt. And I think that experience is really going to cement in Jackson a particular distaste and hatred for any kind of lethal violence. I mean, she's Jackson's space boots after all. I think she's going to be doing a lot of kicking, actually. There's going to be a bit of space kung fu going on in some of her stories. And I want Jackson to be someone who solves problems with her wits and with her charm, and by talking her way out of situations and solving problems in an intelligent way and in a compassionate way and in a fun way. That's what I want Jackson Space Boots to do, and that's what she wants to do. But there's a situation where I mean, the whole point is that this is early in her development. This is like one of Jackson's first ever adventures. This wouldn't be her first story, but it's like a prequel. It's like it's a moment that we explore a bit later on. And this is something formative and traumatic that happened to Jackson when she was trying to save her brother Tiller. They weren't expecting much resistance. This was a remote science station on a moon so insignificant it didn't have a name, just a designation, A216. The scientists... Alright, so that's the first time we're mentioning scientists. I'm going to say the scientists here. The scientists here were expecting a grocery delivery, not an attack. They'd had her brother Tiller captive for a year now, and if they'd been worried about a rescue attempt, their science station wouldn't be listed in the goddamn yellow pages. On paper, Tiller's captivity was perfectly legal. He was enrolled in a vocational training program with an infotech corp called Alphaplex. I could say corporation for clarity, but just saying corp makes it part of like the language of the world. It gives it more like of a cyberpunky sort of vibe, I think, if you say corp, as though corp is like a commonly used term. So there's an argument for saying corporation, but yeah. I mean, I guess there's a risk that corp, people might think that it's like core, as in like a military organization. Isn't that a possible meaning of the word? Maybe I'll say corporation. An infotech corporation called Alphaplex. And it's probably too obvious and too on the nose what Alphaplex is referencing. I think it's actually kind of clever the way it references a particular real world company, but it's maybe it's too obvious, maybe it's not. I don't care. Only Tiller had never signed up to such a program. He couldn't. Tiller was mostly non-verbal. He couldn't go to a normal school or a workplace, not on his own. And yet one day, Tiller had disappeared from home with no warning or explanation. After months of searching, Jackson found his name listed as a registered trainee of Alphaplex on this bumfuck nowhere moon. Tiller wouldn't have left like that by choice. He couldn't. He would have at least said goodbye to his big sister. So when I say, like, Tiller was mostly non-verbal, like, the implication is that he is in some way disabled or different or neurodiverse or whatever term you want to use. And, like, I don't want to be super specific about Tiller's condition. I think I just want to describe him in the ways that are relevant at the time. And I think saying that he's mostly non-verbal, I hope that gets the point across. Because non-verbal, like, I don't know if that's a term, I don't know what implications that term will have in different people's heads, but I think the point is that, I mean, we then explain, he couldn't go to a normal school or a workplace, not on his own. So I think we get the point across here, which is that Tiller is a bit different and needs support, and that's part of why Jackson feels responsible for him. So I think we adequately get that across there. Jackson had read rumors online about these kinds of disappearances. Private Infotech Corps. Maybe that's a good opportunity to say corporations, because this is speaking a bit more generally. So we could just say shady corporations or secretive corporations. I think that's better. Secretive corporations offered free training and job placements that sounded too good to be true. They targeted the young, the poor, the disabled, and they're like, I'm not sure if I want to say disabled or neurotypical or what I want to say specifically. I don't want to be overly specific, because it's not the point, and it's not what I'm trying to talk about. I think the point is that Tiller is someone who has needs, and Jackson is responsible for him. Remus in the chat says, big fan of your first work with the Chocolate River story of memories. Thanks, Remus. Yeah, that was a fun one. That was one of the live improvised ones. And yeah, I don't remember it that well, but it was fun. It was a good way to kick off the Martin Cordial channel, I think. Thanks for being here. So corporations targeted these people, and contracts were signed by people who couldn't read, passports and papers confiscated, debts and obligations concocted. I think invented might be or even made up might be better than concocted. People disappeared into secretive research facilities and came back traumatized, incoherent, or not at all. Jackson didn't know if these rumors were true, but she'd hired investigators, spent money she couldn't afford, and learned two things for certain. Alphaplex was involved in some secret, shady shit, and Tiller was in their facility on this moon. That's all she needed to know, so she hired Merc and came to rescue her brother. So we finally sort of outright state what's going on here and what Jackson's goal is. She's come to this moon to rescue her brother from this mysterious corporation. And I'm sort of indulging in like two tropes at once here. Like I'm going for the secret evil corporation baddie, and I'm going for the secret evil mad scientist thing, which sort of comes in more later. And I don't know, I feel vaguely guilty about indulging in both of those tropes because, I don't know, they can be a bit cartoonish. But I don't know, I think it works for this particular story. Um, and yeah, and the whole thing of contracts signed by people who couldn't read, passports confiscated, debts and obligations invented. I mean, obviously that is very much inspired by real world exploitative labor practices, trafficking practices. Like I am consciously like thinking about real things here at the same time as trying to be glib about it. So I think you could criticize the tone in this story. Rega points out that the word secretive is used twice here. That's a good point. Thanks. Um, hmm. I wonder which one I should remove because there's all you could replace it with a different private. What if I just say private research facilities? I think that gets the point across. People disappeared into private research facilities. But yeah, like the tone's tricky because I want this like prequel story to be like an uncharacteristically dark and intimate story in an otherwise more upbeat series. But I still want to preserve some of the silliness and some of the tongue-in-cheek stuff. Like here, like I was originally going to say that, she learned two things for certain. Alphaplex was up to some deep, dark, black bag, cloak and dagger, shady-ass shit until it was in their facility. Because that's fun. Just that term is fun. But it was a bit too silly. So, like, I still have some jokes in here. Like, I still have some, like, fun, silly stuff in this story. But I am trying to hold it back a little bit just to preserve the somewhat more serious tone. Jackson peered out the window in the back of the truck and saw the great plume of dust thrown up in their wake, drifting in the thin air like red fog. This moon had only half a G of gravity, but Jackson was comfortable in low G. She had her grunkle's old moon boots, which she'd worn in space since she was 10 years old. The boots were hopelessly old-fashioned and extremely heavy, and drew mocking smirks from the mercenaries. But Jackson found the weight of the boots comforting and familiar. They helped keep her feet on the ground. Her grunkle died years ago, but he was with her wherever she walked. So she's got these boots as like a lovely totem to her relative that she loved. I think her grunkle actually disappeared. And it might be nice to sort of mention that now, just to sort of introduce the mystery of Jackson's grunkle. I've got a bit of like a family tree and a bit of history. I got some stuff worked out. And it's good to sort of hint at some of that early, I think. Merc says, all right, we're coming up on the station. Remember, as far as these science brains are concerned, we are just this month's delivery of vegetables and prophylactics. The longer they believe that, the better, so keep your heads down. We'll split into pairs, find the boy, and if anyone tries to stop us, we put him to sleep. First, they've got to let us into their delivery bay, so until we're inside, shut up and look like a cabbage. And I quite like that line. I'm quite fond of shut up and look like a cabbage. And I'm quite fond of we are just this month's delivery of vegetables and prophylactics. And I hope it's obvious that like this is like a delivery truck that brings this remote science outpost groceries and food and stuff. And so that's why he's saying shut up and look like a cabbage, because that's like that's what they normally bring as food. But maybe I should mention that maybe there's some like scraps of vegetable leaves on the ground and stuff, because that's what was originally inside the truck. So yeah, maybe I should do that. And also like science brains is a bit of a weird term. Like he could just say scientists. That's clearer than science brains. But I also want to communicate Merc's disdain for these scientists, and indeed for everyone. So I don't know. Maybe I'll say science brains. I don't know. I don't want to take away the clarity here. I don't want to confuse what is an otherwise good sentence. And vegetables and prophylactics. Like I read about Antarctic research stations, because in the real world they are the most remote, some of the most remote places in the world are these research stations where scientists stay to study Antarctica and the Arctic, and they stay out there for months or years at a time. It's like being on the International Space Station. It's like being in outer space, because you are in this totally inhospitable climate that's far away from everywhere else. And apparently all they do is, there's a lot of sex going on in Antarctica, I understand, because there's not much else to do. The term snow wives, I've heard, is a practice. People form couples that, it's like a bit of a what happens in Antarctica stays in Antarctica situation. So per capita, apparently consumption of prophylactics, contraceptives, per capita is extremely high in Antarctica as a result of there being little else to do. So that's sort of what I'm thinking of when I'm saying this month's delivery of vegetables and prophylactics. Rhaegar and Bill talk about the term grunkle. Because, grunkle is short for great uncle. And, Gravity Falls has popularized that word. And I hope it's not overly... Like, I hope that when I say grunkle, I hope that Gravity Falls is not the only thing people think of. Because I'm pretty sure grunkle is a thing outside of Gravity Falls. I don't know. I like it. I'm using it. Remus in the chat says, I missed the start of the story. Could you summarize what happened so far? So all that's happened is that Jackson Space Boots has arrived on this remote moon, and she's here to rescue her brother Tiller. Her brother Tiller seems to have been mysteriously abducted or taken into this corporate science facility in the middle of nowhere. And Jackson has hired some unsavory mercenary people to help her extract her brother. And so they are attempting to enter the facility now. So Merc says, "Shut up and look like a cabbage." And Darcy says, "Yes, sir." Her eye visor flashed with a flourish of green lights, which was her equivalent for winking or waggling her eyebrows. So there is like a bit of a cyberpunk aesthetic going on here, with like Darcy has this sort of space age visor. It's a bit like what's his name in Star Trek has that visor instead of eyes. And Merc regrew his face. So, there's a bit of like a body modification, cybernetic, dystopic sort of a vibe going on, which is something that I want to play with in Jackson's universe. And Renner grinned and thumped his fist on an armored chest like a frat bro pumping himself up to do something regrettable. I'd really like Renner to high-five Lendermere, his twin, because I think that high-five would add to like the sort of frat bro thing. Well, I should just have Renner high-five Darcy, shouldn't I? Yeah, how about Renner high-fived Darcy and thumped his fist on his armored chest, grinning like a frat bro pumping himself up to do something regrettable. And Jackson says, "Please, be patient with my brother. Be gentle." Renner gave a half-hearted nod. Darcy smirked. And Merc stood impassively. So Merc is standing there. And again, I hope this image is clear, but it was described before that Merc is like standing in the moving truck. And to like steady himself, he's holding on to like the webbing and the straps that are on the wall to hold cargo. And so he looks like a spider on a web with his arms holding the straps. And here, like, I sort of want to say, he's standing impassively with his arms outstretched like a bored Christ. Because he's like T-posing in like a Christ pose. So, a bored Christ is kind of like a funny image to me. Like he's on the cross and he's just bored. But, I don't want to be that guy who mentions Christ every time someone fucking T-poses. So I don't think we're going to include that. It's a bit too silly. But I do want to work on this section Because, like, the emotion I'm trying to convey here is that Jackson is really uncomfortable because her brother is delicate and her brother has special needs, and she wants to make sure that they are sensitive and delicate to his needs and to this delicate situation. And they clearly are not as sensitive as she wants them to be. And so there's this really deep anxiety that Jackson has about, like, you know, are they going to treat my brother okay? Are they going to treat this situation with the appropriate care? And I need to add to this. Well, yeah, I mean, this I sort of attempt to get that across here. Whenever Tiller had a bad episode, Jackson was the only one who could calm him. When he hid in a corner and rocked, knocking his head against the wall, Jackson brought him back. She would sit with him for hours and give him a bracelet to play with, the one with the yellow beads. Ever since Tiller disappeared, she wore the yellow bracelet. She wouldn't come home until she gave the bracelet to her brother. So I'm hoping that communicates Jackson's need to look after her brother and the emotional stakes involved here. And I like the yellow bracelet as a symbol of that connection. And yeah, and I mean, you know, when he's hiding in a corner and rocking with his head against the wall, that's definitely evoking some, like, real world conditions. And I'm not, like, I'm not trying to be too specific about that, because it's not important necessarily. But the point is that Tiller is someone who's, like, vulnerable and has needs, and Jackson feels responsible for looking after him. The truck slowed to a stop outside the station. The rumbling engine quietened, and Jackson could hear her heart thumping. Like the goddamn hammer of Grond, I want to say. But I'm not going to use that because that's too silly in this context. The hammer of Grond was the battering ram that was used by the orcs and the army of Sauron to attack Minas Tirith. Minas Tirith? Osgiliath? One of the Gondorian cities. So I like that reference. And I like the possibility that Jackson Space Boots might actually have read The Lord of the Rings, because I think the world of Jackson Space Boots is our universe just in the future. And so it's conceivable that Jackson might have read some ancient, long-forgotten, obscure literature called The Lord of the Rings and might reference it. That'd be fun. She could faintly hear the thin alien wind brushing red sand against the truck, like distant rain. Her hand was still a little sticky with her blood. Merc got on the radio. "Hey there, this is Charlie from Orion Imports, here with your delivery." He affected a friendly tone that Jackson found creepy. She could see the line along Merc's forehead where the new face had been grafted on to his old flesh. The new face was hairless and smooth like wet clay, but the old skin of his scalp and neck was pocked and lined and leathery, like the hide of a Komodo dragon. Merc licked his lips. So I really like using that, like, creepy, animalistic imagery around Merc to make him scary. For long seconds, there was silence on the radio. Jackson almost hoped that they'd have to turn around and go home. This was a terrible plan. She didn't know what she was doing. Millions of miles from home, surrounded by criminals and killers. Maybe Tiller wasn't even here. She could still go back home, take that admin job her friend told her about, go on that date with what's-his-name, but the yellow bracelet weighed on her wrist. A voice crackled out of the radio. "You're not the usual driver." It sounded wary. "No, Todd is feeling unwell, so I'm his replacement for this month," Merc replied. Todd was feeling extremely fucking unwell, Jackson knew. About now, Todd would be waking up in a pile of cabbages in a locked storage room behind the spaceport, doped with enough amnesiacs that he wouldn't know his own name till Tuesday. Jackson felt guilty for drugging him, but at least Todd had gotten a bunch of free drinks along with the knockout drugs last night, and he won't starve in the storage room. With all the vegetables they dumped from the truck, he'd be eating better than Jax had in months. "So would you pop the door for us, mate?" Merc said. Over his armor, Merc was wearing the blue vest he had taken from Todd's uniform. A wolf in Todd's clothing. The radio crackled a little longer. "Come on in," the voice said. The station's garage door raised, and they drove into the darkness. So, I hope that we're appropriately ominous so far. I definitely do want to have this building sense of Jackson's desperation against a foreboding sense of everything's about to go wrong, because you'd better believe that it is. I could say grocery delivery here, just again to sort of reinforce that that's why they keep talking about fucking cabbages, is because this was a truck full of vegetables and prophylactics before they dumped all the real cargo to smuggle themselves in. I hope that all of that is clear. Remus in the chat says that Grond was much more than just a battering ram. It was a mighty weapon of an even mightier valor. Was it? Was it Morgoth's hammer or something? Let me look that up, because I should definitely know a little bit more about Grond. That's what. All right. So it's named after Morgoth's hammer, right? I don't think it actually was Morgoth's hammer. Yeah, the Tolkien Gateway says that it was named to evoke the memory of the ancient weapon of Morgoth. I think if it was literally Morgoth's hammer, then Minas Tirith wouldn't have stood a chance. But it's a fun reference. Cool. Alright, let's enter the facility. "Darcy, what do your eyes see?" And that that is a Lord of the Rings reference. And that one I will leave in, because it's not quite as on the nose. It's not as obvious. But you know, like in Lord of the Rings, Aragorn's like, "Legolas, what do your elf eyes see?" Because Legolas has superior elven vision. Darcy, with her eye visor, has superior vision, so Merc is asking what she sees. And I think that reference is appropriate. It's not too obvious. "Can't see far into the facility," she replied, frowning through her visor. "They got some kind of shielding in the walls. But there's someone waiting just in from the loading bay. A big someone." Darcy fiddled with a dial. "With an elevated heart rate, looks like. Could be trouble." "Len, back the truck into the far corner. We'll use it as cover as we exit. Darcy, you and me will swing out the left side and cover while the twins follow. We'll surround and pacify the threat." Anxiety twisted in Jackson's gut. She had hoped there'd be no violence. She only brought 4 mercenaries. What if there was a battle and they were outnumbered? What if she got shot and had to get a new face like Merc? Jackson clenched her fists again. But Tilla needed her. There was no turning back. And I kind of already did that sort of emotional moment before they entered the garage, but it's fine. Yeah. Alright. As they drove into the loading bay, the bright sun and wind of the moon was muffled away as they entered the darker, quieter, artificial space inside. Jackson was reminded of the chapel where they held her grunkle's funeral. She flexed her feet inside his boots, because those are her grunkle's boots. Len backed their truck into the far corner of the loading bay. The mercenaries all looked purposeful and focused, adjusting straps on their armor and belts. Even Darcy went quiet and still, like a big cat crouching in long grass. Jackson felt horribly out of place. Maybe Merc was right, and she should just stay in the truck. And I want to sort of contrast this with, like, I want Jackson to be confident in like most of her stories, in her later stories, I want her to be accomplished and sort of knowing what she's about, or at least pretending to. Um, this is early proto Jackson. This is before she's an adventurer, really. Like she's just like a young person, sort of out of her depth at this point. And so this is part of how she became the person who she is in the main series. Before he opened the vehicle's door, Merc put a hand on Jackson's shoulder. How about a heavy hand, just to make it a little more dramatic? "Wait here. You'll be safe in the truck," he hissed. "We'll be back with your brother." It was almost as though Merc genuinely cared for Jackson's well-being, but Jax knew the real reason. Merc wouldn't get his payment in full if anything happened to his client. Reggae points out a little potential plot hole in the chat. She says, funeral. So Grunkle was dead? I think maybe you just said that he disappeared. Yeah, it's a good point. I guess I've sort of changed my mind back and forth about whether Grunkle was dead or disappeared. I think he's disappeared, presumed dead. So I guess they had a funeral for him after a while when they sort of decided that he wasn't coming back. And I could imagine like a dramatic funeral scene where, you know, Jackson holds out hope that Grunkle is alive, and maybe she refuses to even come to the funeral because she wants to believe that her Grunkle is alive, and she's wearing his space boots in the hope that he'll come home to reclaim them one day. And maybe he will. Maybe he will. Merc raised a hand and silently counted down from 5. At 0, the mercenaries burst out of the truck, stun guns at the ready. At first, Jackson stayed inside. It was inside the vehicle. It was the sensible thing to do. She wasn't a fighter. Why put herself in danger? But then Jackson heard a scream, a female voice echoing out through the loading bay, and all Jackson's thoughts and fears evaporated. The scream wiped them away, like cobwebs cleared from her mind. She kicked open the door with her Grunkle's boot and ran towards the commotion. So I want this to be like a sort of an important moment for her, because this is sort of maybe like the first time or one of the early times that Jackson really leaps into action, you know? She's making the decision, even though she's not prepared, even though she's afraid, she's making the decision to run in towards danger to try and help. So I probably need to add more sort of build up around this moment, just to make that feel a bit more significant. So Merc, Darcy, and the twins were spread out across the loading bay, crouching behind shelves or around corners, all pointing their sleeper guns at a large, terrified woman. A girl, really, couldn't have been more than 18. She had long black hair and big brown eyes, and tufts of magenta feathers behind her ears. She shook like a leaf, gaping wide-eyed at the weapons pointed at her. Oh, thank God, she said. You're here to save us. Merc strode up and grabbed the girl's arm, and she gave a little gasp at his uncanny face. What's the security here? He hissed. How many guards? Nothing, the feathered girl said. There's no one, just me and Smitter and a few other patients. Head Dr. Gordon died a few weeks ago, so we've been waiting to get rescued. Jackson stepped forward, moved Merc aside. Are you safe? Do you need food or anything? Jackson felt a pang of guilt at the vegetables they'd dumped. She knew what it was to be hungry. No, Feathers replied, choked back a sob. It's just... Welcome, esteemed visitors, a voice blared over a PA system. An older man's voice with a certain dramatic flair. Jackson was reminded of her old theatre teacher, who was equally theatrical both on and off the stage. Welcome to Red Sky Station. Who the hell is that? Merc whispered to Feathers. Feathers looked like she had seen a ghost. That's Dr. Gordon. You said he died, Merc hissed. Feathers just nodded slowly, terrified. So I like this. This is the voice of a dead man blaring out. And I guess to make this more impactful and dramatic, this dead man, Dr. Gordon, talking, I think we should mention Dr. Gordon sooner. Like, I think what I should do is talk about Dr. Gordon, even like way back when we're talking about this facility. We should mention Dr. Gordon up here. Like, maybe we could mention it around here. Like, we could have Jackson say, you know, according to her research, this facility was run by a doctor. For some reason, Stanislaus comes to mind as a name. Or I think I misspell it. There's a name like that I think I feel like there's some kind of BS reason why I think Stanislaus, but I'll go with it. According to our research, this facility was run by a Dr. Stanislaus Gordon. Jackson had seen his picture in documents from a private detective. He didn't look like an evil man. If he had Tilla, surely she could convince him to let her take her brother home. So yeah, I wanted like something. I want to do something like that, just to sort of like seed a bit earlier on this question of who is Dr. Gordon, and Jackson having some kind of like, you know, speculation or some kind of emotional investment in who this Dr. Gordon guy is, just so that way down here, when we hear the voice of Gordon, it's a little bit more significant when he is supposedly dead. And also it is a joke, Gordon's name, because like Gordon you'd normally spell like, you know, Gordan, but I'm spelling it Gourdan because a gourd is like a pumpkin-y sort of a vegetable. And the word gourd is also sometimes used as like a slang term for a head, like if someone's out of their gourd. And he is a head doctor in that he is the most important doctor, but a gourd is also a head. And Dr. Gordon is specifically like a neuroscientist. He's a brain doctor. So it's sort of like a triple joke because he's a neuroscientist, so he's a head doctor, and he's the head doctor, as in the preeminent doctor, and his name is Gordon, and a gourd is a head or a brain. So there's a fun little intertwining of meanings there that I'm sure most people wouldn't notice, but I think is fun. There's also like a few meanings with the name Merc, because Merc, M-E-R-C is short for mercenary, and Merc is a mercenary. But Merc, especially spelled M-U-R-K, is a slang word for kill. If you murk someone, you murder them, you kill them. So he's a mercenary merc, and he's a murderer merc, and also he is murky. He's a shady character. He is a character of darkness, and in that sense, he is murky. So there's sort of a triple meaning there as well, which I also think is fun. Of course, this would need to be read on paper to even notice this, because the spelling of Gordon and the spelling of Merc, you only notice that if you read it. It wouldn't work if it was just read out loud, I guess. Because I am conscious that if you just hear out loud Merc, you might think that I'm just saying MERC, just short for mercenary. It needs to be clear that it's a name. So if it was read out, it might have to change the name. I'm also sort of conscious that I need to sort of figure out a bit more of the specifics of Jackson's upbringing. Like we mentioned here that Jackson knew what it was to be hungry, but she's also remembering that she had an old theater teacher, like at school or somewhere, and it's like so what she wasn't in a situation where she could have food, but she was in a situation where she could study theater at her school. Does that make sense socioeconomically? I think the idea is that Jackson's grunkle was instrumental in the development and like the colonization and the expansion of the city on the moon, on Luna. And I think that generated some wealth for Jackson's family, or at least for part of Jackson's family. But Jackson's father was kind of a deadbeat and squandered some of that money after the grunkle disappeared. So I think perhaps Jackson's family has suffered a decline in economic status. I think they used to live in some prosperity and some wealth, but then that was lost, partly because of her father being inept. So Jackson has sort of experienced a few different kinds of situations, and that has probably helped her to be adaptable. But yeah, she's got a complicated family situation, which we're going to get into, and which will come up again later on, I think. But the point is that we are now hearing the voice of the mysterious Dr. Gordon. And he says, "Welcome to Red Sky Station." And he was supposedly dead, and yet he is speaking. And the voice on the PA says, "Smitter told me that you are the delivery people, but clearly he was mistaken. I know exactly who you are." Jackson froze. The mercenaries' hands drifted to the stun guns on their belts. How did this dead doctor know they were here? "You must be executives from Kamea Capital, responding to my invitation to discuss investment opportunities. So please, come into my office for tea and a short presentation." Even through his waxy, mask-like face, Merc looked vexed, maybe nonplussed. I think that's a more fun and appropriate word. This was not how he had expected the mission to proceed. Darcy was scanning through her visor and frowning like a blind man at a silent film, and the twins stood with their sleeper guns held limp and useless in their hands, like hockey players at a basketball court. They were not equipped for this. So Jackson stepped forward and cleared her throat. Jackson gathered her courage, stepped forward, and said, "Yes. Yes, my colleagues and I from Kamea Capital are eager to hear what you have to show us." Merc shot Jackson a razor-sharp glare of "What the hell are you doing?" Darcy giggled. The twins looked confused. Jackson looked at Feathers and smiled gently. "Perhaps you could show us to the good doctor's office." So we've had a sort of unexpected turn of events. Jackson and the mercenaries were expecting some kind of military infiltration of this facility, perhaps some violence, but all of a sudden the guy in charge is inviting them for fucking tea and crumpets and some kind of investment presentation. So I'm hoping that sort of twist is keeping people on their toes. But it's not the only sort of twist in affairs that's going on here. So I think I like it so far. I think it's interesting so far. I think we've got the sort of emotional drive the emotional impetus of Jackson trying to find her brother. And we've got the sort of mystery of like what this facility is. Actually, we need a bit more of that, actually, don't we? Because that is something that's explored later, is like the purpose of this facility, and yet that hasn't really been questioned yet. So maybe we can mention that like at the point where we're talking about Gordon. I think here is a good spot to sort of question what is this facility like and what's going on here. So, according to her research, this facility was run by a Dr. Stanislaus Gordon. Jackson had seen his picture in documents from her private detective, but she couldn't uncover the purpose behind Gordon's research here. It was well funded by a secretive network. It was well funded by an elaborate network of shell companies. Connected to infotech, biotech, biotech, and neuroscience labs. What were they up to? And what were they doing with Tiller? I think that's good, because we're trying to build up a bit of mystery here, right? So I think it's important to actually raise those questions a bit earlier on. So yeah, I think that's good. Bill in the live chat says, I like the lost wealth idea for her family. Like maybe the inherited boots were super high quality and once revered, but are now out of fashion. Yeah, and especially like as the series and as Jackson's story goes on, her boots are increasingly ridiculous. Like they're just hopelessly out of date. But she has a deep personal connection because they were her grunkle's boots, and so and part of the idea is that like the boots are very heavy, and like at first I was thinking, the boots could be like deliberately weighed with lead or something to make them super heavy for the purpose of like when you're on like a low gravity moon or something, adding the extra weight to your boots would help you to stick to the ground and help you to walk around like normal. Like if you've got additional weight, that would counteract the low gravity, so you can maybe walk more normally. And I'm pretty sure that makes no sense. Like, I'm no physicist and I didn't research this enough, but like I would think that if you're adding weight to yourself so that you can still walk normally in a low gravity place, you'd want to add that weight to like your center of gravity, like around your torso and your hips and stuff, I would imagine. If you put all the weight in your boots, it's not going to help you feel like you can walk normally. It'll just be all in your boots, But I do like the idea that, for whatever reason, these boots are just absurdly heavy. But that makes Jackson super muscular in her legs, like almost like a superhero. Like she's got just like the legs and the hips and like the lower body of just like an Olympic weightlifter. Just like incredible squat power. Which makes her like superhumanly good at like kicking people and running around and jumping and doing cool space shit. Which is ridiculous, but that is, part of the tone that I want to have in most of these stories. She's almost like, a superhero. She's an adventurer. She's like a pulp ass-kicking comic book character almost. And so I think her grunkle's boots are a part of how she achieves that, because she wears these heavy, heavy boots even in like 1G, even in like regular gravity. Bill says, does she have big feet, or does her grunkle have small feet, or are the boots adjustable? I mean, yeah, it's a good question. It would be a coincidence, I suppose, if she had the same size of feet as her grunkle. But maybe that's, part of their connection. They just happen to have the same sized feet, and that sort of adds to the sense of, their personal connection and her inheriting his legacy. Because I really like this idea that Jackson's grunkle was really important and really influential on the moon, on Luna. And that legacy has sort of fallen into disrepair since the grunkle disappeared, and since Jackson's family has had sort of a downturn. And it occurs to me that she needs a surname, doesn't she? Because I do like the idea of Jackson's family in itself sort of being a significant entity and an important part of her identity, and her lineage is connected to her family name. So I haven't thought of what that name should be yet, but it should be something good. And I think that Jackson will call herself Jackson Space Boots as a way of rejecting her family name. She has her real family name, but she chooses not to use it, and instead calls herself Jackson Space Boots. That's the identity that she has for herself. And her complicated relationship with her family legacy will be explored and will develop, I think. Bill in the chat says, yeah, the superhero gravity thing, like John Carter or Buck Gatto. I don't know what Buck Gatto is, but yeah, there is that John Carter thing, which is he's on Mars, and since he's on the low gravity of Mars, he's like a superhero. That is a thing, isn't it? I should look into that. Because, yeah, I think I'm going for something kind of similar with Jackson. Because, yeah, just through gravity training and the heavy boots, she just becomes superhuman in certain situations. Remus says Son Goku when he puts off the boots if it gets serious. Yeah, something like that. I don't know. I kind of like her keeping the boots on, but I guess if you're being logical about it, she'd want to take her boots off in order to be faster. That does make sense. All right, so I don't know. Sort of up to here is where the story is fairly solid, I think, and now we're entering more sort of draft territory. And there's the stuff that, is pretty rough. It sort of gets a little weirder from here. So in her worst nights of sleepless anxiety, Jackson had imagined her brother captive in a cruel, barbaric dungeon. She imagined him cold and afraid, sobbing for Jackson to save him. But as Feathers led Jackson and the mercenaries into the facility, the place looked pretty cozy for a prison. It had that clinical prefab feel common to hospitals and spaceports everywhere, but there were lounges and kitchens and observation balconies overlooking the rocky red moonscape beyond. It reminded Jackson of her grunkle's house on Lucy, except this moon was red while Lucy was all grey. Jackson took her first moonwalks on Lucy in her grunkle's boots. So I don't know, maybe that sort of reminiscing is sort of poorly placed here, because Jackson should be a bit more focused on the present, and this needs to be described a bit better and a bit more specifically, like the lounges and the kitchens and stuff. But there were lounges and kitchens with nice faux wood paneling. There was even a football. There was even a football table with a heavy lead ball for low gravity. I don't know if we need that detail, but yeah, there was even a football table. The place looked rather like a school camp. So it's weirdly homey, this place. And yet it was all but empty. So so we do need to get into more description of this place. The mercenaries stalked alongside her, alert, checking corners. We could say checking doors and corners, which is a meme in a science fiction series called The Expanse that you might have heard of. I don't know if we want to necessarily name drop that. Unwilling to relax. But Jackson felt strangely confident, hopeful that Tiller was here, and soon they'd reunite. And you know, hope comes before the fall, right? Jackson turned to the feathered girl. Is there someone called Tiller here? He's my brother. I'm trying to find him. Tiller? Yes, yeah, he's here, but... Her face went grim. He's been in treatment for a long time. Jackson's heart tightened, like a plastic water bottle with the air sucked out. Treatment for what? Feathers frowned. Don't you know? This place is a hospital for people with terminal brain mumps. Dr. Gordon kept us here and gave us medicine to keep us healthy. Brain mumps? Tiller never had any brain mumps. Are you sure this place is... Jackson frowned. Where is Tiller? Just take me to him, please. When the mumps go bad, Dr. Gordon takes the patient into the treatment room. He works very hard to help them, but sometimes they don't come back out again. My friend went in last year, and she didn't make it. She lowered her head. Now that Dr. Gordon is gone, who's going to protect us? And then Dr. Gordon's voice came over the PA again, and Feathers jumped a foot in the air like a startled cat. Friends, I'm so glad you're here to see my incredible breakthroughs. Please, step inside and view this short presentation. So, I mean, brain mumps sounds ridiculous. And I think I'll allow myself that. Like, maybe it's too ridiculous for the tone of this story, but I enjoy it. And it's meant to be, like, you know, paper thin. So we sort of start to realize that, you know, Dr. Gordon has... he has one stated purpose for this lab, but it has some, like, actual secret purpose. And I want to show the treatment room, or I want Jackson to sort of see a few things in this facility that sort of evokes a bit of dread and, you know, sort of deepens the mystery of what's going on here. So I don't know, maybe it could be as simple as, you know, Jackson just saying, you know, what are they really doing here? You know, what is this place really? You know, just something like that needs to be said somehow, just to sort of develop that further. But are you ready? Because we're about to do like an exposition dump. And this is one of the other things that I sort of like, but sort of don't like about this story so far, is that we're about to jump into like a big world building exposition dump that's not like super strictly relevant to the actual like emotional narrative here. So it needs work to sort of fit it in better. I think it might be a bit jarring, this exposition dump, but I also like it. There is some world building going on in this universe that I do want to get across. So I'll have to figure out how to do this sensitively. So Dr. Gordon starts speaking again, and I think we need to introduce like a space for this to happen in. Like there needs to be some blocking going on here. But somehow they end up in a room, and Dr. Gordon, this disembodied voice, is doing a presentation. And he says, "It is not an exaggeration to say that my research could push human computing and neuroscience forward by centuries." The mercenaries were unmoved, so Jackson tried to look interested. There was a camera in the corner. Jackson presumed that Gordon was watching. They looked a pretty ragged for a bunch of corporate investors, so Jackson thought she'd better play the part. She frowned and nodded thoughtfully as Gordon launched into a well-practiced monologue. That should probably... I don't know where I'll put that bit. As you know, Gordon continued. For generations, human technology has been crippled. I mean, you could just say humanity. That might be better and a bit more. Humanity has been crippled. The mysterious Butler Virus completely disabled every computer in the galaxy. Any processor more powerful than a wristwatch or a moonlander is inoperable. And whenever and wherever a new computer is built, it is instantly infected and disabled by Butler. We are all familiar with the damnable blank red display of an infected system. Butler's red glow emanates from thousands of frozen screens in once great cities on 100 worlds. Already we are beginning to forget life before Butler, but in those times computer systems were the beating heart of every human world. They helped provide communication, medicine, media, transport, science. The sudden loss of these systems was a calamity. The sudden loss of these systems to Butler was a calamity. Planet-wide megalopoli were snuffed out. In a day. Billions were trapped in paralyzed cities inside trains that would not run, inside apartments that would not open. Millions died, and millions still remained. Humanity's worlds have gone dark. Humanity's worlds were silenced. And by the very nature of the tragedy, we may never find out the extent of the damage. Once our worlds were linked by light, but Butler has made the galaxy as distant and silent. The galaxy as distant and remote as an ocean in the days of wooden ships. Make no mistake, the human species is in a dark age, and every day that goes by, the very memory of our former glory slips from our consciousness like water from the cupped hands of Tantalus. Past research has attempted to remove the Butler virus from infected machines, or create shielding and fields that might prevent Butler from infecting new systems, but nothing has worked. Butler's miasma seems inescapable for any kind of conventional computing technology. So today, I present an entirely new solution to this ancient problem. Jackson could hear Gordon's grin through the PA. She could almost imagine him gesticulating as he spoke, like a carnival salesman selling something dubious. So yeah, we're really dumping some exposition here. And again, like, I don't know if this is quite the right place to be dumping this exposition. But it's sort of relevant to what I want Gordon to be up to. The fact is, Gordon said, that every one of us already has a powerful computing device inside our heads. The human brain is the oldest and greatest tool for problem solving, computation, memory, creation, and imagination. And it is immune to the Butler virus. Its only limitation is its attachment to our weak, soft bodies. Our brain's only limitation is its attachment to our weak, soft bodies, constraining our cognition within the limits of our skull, within our senses, our mortality, ourselves. I, Dr. Gordon, have developed a novel method to free the human brain from its biological limitations, adapt it to a synthetic neural medium that has no limits. With enough donor brain tissue, I can reprogram and reconfigure it into a unified network in this synthetic medium to create a system that can emulate the function of a conventional computer. Already, my synthetic brain networks can perform addition, subtraction, and run Pong. With more time and the investment of additional funds, I'm confident that I can develop a fully functioning operating system, running not on microchips, but on a human neuronal material. A new kind of computer, immune from the Butler infection. For the first time in 100 years, humanity will be freed from the virus and restored to our past greatness. Millions will be lifted from blah 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 blah. The mercenaries were quiet. Jackson and Feathers looked at each other. Merc said, "So this guy is turning people's brains into computers?" Darcy nodded through her eye visor. "Apparently." "Is that possible?" Darcy crossed her eyes. "Not bloody likely." "I know you're skeptical," Gordon boomed over the PA, "but the proof is right before your eyes." His voice changed. It no longer came from the PA, but from the end of the hallway ahead of them. "Smitter, carry me in," he said. A figure stepped into the darkened room. "Behold!" Gordon cried. Jackson squinted at the dark figure. "The lights!" Gordon hollered. "The lights, damn you, Smitter!" Smitter turned on the lights, and Jackson and the mercenaries saw Dr. Gordon. There wasn't much of him. The doctor had no body or face, just a pinkish orb about the size of a cue ball, held by Smitter atop a little cushion. "This is no illusion. I, Dr. Gordon, have synthesized my own mind into this revolutionary new medium. My brain is now unrestrained by the limitations of biology. I'm freed from mortality. I can extend my mind palace through infinite space and time. I am unstoppable." Jackson strode up and grabbed the little pink brain orb. "Dr. Gordon, I'm afraid I must decline this investment opportunity. Take me to my brother, please. Tiller. And then we'll get out of your hair." So I feel like we have gone off the rails a bit. We had been building up quite a nice bit of tension and some nice atmosphere, and then all of a sudden this goddamn mad scientist has burst onto the scene and dumped all this exposition, and I feel like that kind of ruins the tone a bit. But at the same time, like I there is this world building that I want to put in here, and which is what I've worked out as like Tiller's predicament, because the idea is that, you know, Dr. Gordon has been using these vulnerable people for their brain matter, to experiment on them in order to develop this kind of brain computer technology. And that's what Jackson needs to rescue Tiller from. And I like this whole background. I like this whole idea of the Butler virus because yeah, this is set in the future. This is set in the far future. But I want it to be a future that doesn't rely too much on fancy high-tech technology. I don't want this to be a universe where computers rule the world. And so the Butler virus is like the reason why computers and like high-tech aren't a thing. So I guess it's a little bit like Dune in that respect. And Dune has the Butlerian jihad. Jackson has the Butler virus. So that is a very on-the-nose reference. The Butler virus is the reason why there aren't computers in Jackson's universe. There's a lot of sort of analog technology. And, you know, I'm a bit wishy-washy with exactly how much computers are a thing. Because, like, you know, there's spaceships in Jackson's world. There's, like, interstellar transport. So there's got to be some, like, computers running stuff. So that's why I say any computer more advanced than a wristwatch or a moon lander gets infected and disabled by the virus. And the wristwatch and the moon lander is itself a joke because, you know, they say, everyone likes to say that, you know, the craft that landed on the moon in 1969 had less computing power than a wristwatch today. So I like saying a wristwatch or a moonlander, which again, maybe that's too much of a joke. But you know, this guy, in order to get around this mysterious limitation, where there's this mysterious virus that disables any computer, instead of using computers out of microchips, he's making computers out of human brain matter. And so he wants to develop this into an actual working computer system in order to reach and bring humanity back up out of this dark age that it's in. Because I really do enjoy this idea that, you know, humanity was in some kind of golden age, some sort of high-tech golden age. But then, you know, in a matter of moments, this mysterious virus disabled all of the computers in the galaxy. And so all these high-tech cities were instantly paralyzed. Billions of people were trapped in paralyzed cities, inside trains that would not run, inside apartments that would not open. You know, farming machinery stopped, and, you know, the phones went dead, and you know, I think there's a special kind of horror about like a high-tech city that becomes that gets shut down and people die within the technology that they built. I think that's really cool. And I think that, you know, that makes Jackson's universe kind of post-apocalyptic. There has been a bit of an apocalypse that happened when all this technology shut down. And so, you know, we're now in this sort of retro future where people are still surviving and sort of rebuilding, but they no longer have the technology that they had before, or they maybe have remnants of the technology that they had before. And it makes for a sort of fractured... And you know, the idea that all these planets are now isolated from each other, which means that they're all sort of mysterious. Like, there could be more sort of diversity and difference and conflict in that sort of darkness, in that sort of unknown nature of everything. The planets aren't in communication with each other like they were before. And Lauren in the chat says Interstellar. Yeah, so we're going Interstellar. Like, you know, this is not hard sci-fi. This is not the kind of sci-fi where I'm going to try and explain, you know, how many G's of acceleration they're doing. I'm not going to try and explain, like, that there is faster than light travel in this universe. Because I want Jackson to be able to gallivant across the galaxy. I want her to go to a different star, to a distant planet, made-up planets, crazy planets, exotic places all over the galaxy, alien races, all of that crazy stuff. I want that to be on the table for Jackson Space Boots. So we are not limiting the story to just our star system. It's not going to be just, you know, Earth and Mars and the Belt. It's not The Expanse. This is more fantastical, more unhinged from scientific reality. Like, we're not even going to worry about, like, gravity on spaceships. I think there's artificial gravity in this universe. It's definitely more of a soft sci-fi, fantastical sort of a vibe that I'm going for. But at the same time, I am having fun with some sort of, like, world-building explanations like the Butler Virus, and giving the universe that sort of post-apocalyptic vibe from, you know, being in a dark age from the downfall of technology, almost like 40K or something, I think is fun. So, you know, I'm trying to go for a bit of darkness, I'm trying to go for some world-building detail and texture, and I'm trying to go for the sort of fantastical freedom from overly restrictive hard sci-fi all at once. So maybe I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too, but I think I like that sort of world building that I'm going for there. Remus says, did humanity have some kind of ultra advanced interstellar internet techno web? Yeah, I mean, I think that they had faster than light communication. Yeah, because they still do have faster than light travel and transport. And if you're able to fly a ship across the galaxy faster than light, then yeah, you should be able to send a message faster than light as well. So I think, yeah, one of the key parts of the Butler Virus was that all the planets were connected. All the planets across the galaxy inhabited by humans were connected by some kind of internet, some kind of communication network that was faster than light, and you could instantaneously speak to anyone anywhere. And that's one of the most devastating things that has happened with the Butler Virus, is that has destroyed those systems. And they still have interstellar ships now, so they can probably still send, interstellar messages faster than light to some capacity, but like the systems have broken down, the infrastructure is broken down, so everything's harder, everything's more mysterious, and everything's more exciting. There's so much more room for adventure. It's a little bit like, you hear movie writers talking about how, the invention of the cell phone has destroyed like most plots in most 90s sitcoms. Like all these, misunderstandings and conflicts and mysteries and dramas, so much of it arises from not being able to just pick up the phone and call anyone anywhere at any time. And I think sci-fi sort of has a version of that. Like if you by taking away the ability to just communicate effortlessly, you add drama and you add space for adventure to happen, Remus says, Bill says, I think the boots are artificial gravity that adjust to whatever the local gravity is. She just has them turned way up normally to be stronger. That's cool. Yeah, and because the boots are old, the Butler virus can't affect them. I like that idea. That's cool. Because you could put the anti-gravity in the boots. Like I think the tradition, like what I was thinking was artificial gravity in the ships. But artificial gravity makes sense in the boots as well. Especially if you have artificial gravity in the ships, why not have artificial gravity on the planets, with the boots? So that's a cool idea. I like that. So I am excited about all this world building stuff, but I'm concerned that dumping all of it here and now is the wrong place to do it, because I'm trying to build up this like tense, emotional, foreboding story about Jackson trying to find her brother Tiller. So maybe I can relocate this stuff. Maybe Jackson only needs to find out the reasons why Tiller is here, like after the drama with Tiller has happened, or maybe the exposition needs to happen earlier. I don't think that this is called Jackson's Nightmare. I don't think that this story should be read until you've read other Jackson stories. Like, this wouldn't be episode 1 of the Jackson Space Boot story. This would be a prequel that comes in later. So maybe, you would already know about the Butler virus when you read this. And so maybe we don't need this info dump, So it needs some sort of structural stuff going on. Remus says, besides frying human technology, what else does the virus do? Did it form conscience? Is it Schwambewusstsein now? Is Schwambewusstsein, is that like consciousness in German? I don't know what that means. Yeah, well, I've got ideas with the virus as well. So the virus is deeply mysterious. Something happened at some point. No one knows exactly why it happened, but this virus suddenly disabled every computer in the galaxy. And so there's all these questions around, well, why did this happen? What caused this? For what purpose? Is this an attack by an alien race? Did some alien race come and disable all our computers in preparation for invasion? Did they cripple us before they're going to attack? And so in universe, that's one of the theories. And other people think that the Butler virus is God. Other people think that the Butler virus is trying to save humanity from themselves and is trying to protect humanity from the potential of the technology going wild. And some people try to communicate with Butler, because every computer and every complicated device that is infected by Butler, it has this red screen and this red logo perhaps that appears on the screen. And sometimes, in certain conditions, occasionally, the Butler virus will display messages to people. You can, like the computers that are infected by the Butler virus, they won't do what you want them to do. You can't run an operating system. You can't perform calculations. But you can input into a Butler machine. You can type on the keyboard, you can click on the mouse, and sometimes the Butler virus responds somehow, or reacts, or it seems to. Anyway. And so these religions and these cults have formed around the Butler virus. And some of these religious sects, they build additional computers. They build servers and they build supercomputers, knowing that, to deliberately get them infected with the Butler virus, so that the Butler virus can run on more machines, because they believe that the more machines are running with the Butler virus, the more connected to God they can be. And they sort of try to communicate with Butler, and they try to receive visions and information and messages from the Butler virus, like messages from God. So you got these sort of tech priests who are worshipping this computer virus. And one of the things is that, all of these computers that are infected with the Butler virus, they are not inactive. Those hard drives are still spinning. Those machines are still whirring. They are using power. They are active. Those computers are doing something. So the question is, what are they doing? What is Butler up to? Butler has taken over the combined computing power of every human world in the galaxy. What is it doing? Is it like Bitcoin mining? Is this just some extra galactic aliens trying to like take over humanity's galaxy for no reason other than to mine some Bitcoins or something? Or just to use it for like scientific processing or something? So there's a question of like, well, is this temporary? Is the Butler virus just taking over humanity's computers for some specific purpose that's going to come to an end? So there's all these questions around the Butler virus that I think are really fun and really interesting. And also this is going to affect Earth. So one idea is that like, so I don't talk about Earth and the Moon. I talk about the Marble and Lucy. Lucy is more properly the name for the main city on Luna. Luna City has been shortened to Lucy. Luna City, Lucy. Which also in my head evokes Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So I really like Lucy as the name for like the moon and for the Lunar City. And Lucy is where Jackson's Grunkle did a lot of work and developed the city of Lucy and built a lot of stuff. And so Lucy is like really important to Jackson's family specifically. Whereas Earth was hit really hard by the Butler virus. Because Earth, naturally as the oldest human world, is the most built up, and it's the most reliant on technology to support its population. So when the Butler virus hit, Earth shut down hard. And Earth has become this mysterious, impenetrable world. Like most of the cities, most of the worlds that were hit by the Butler virus are still accessible. Like they're really fucked up, but they're slowly sort of rebuilding, and many people died on many worlds, but they are sort of rebuilding and they are accessible and they're starting to work together. But Earth is cut off from everywhere else because, and I'm still working this out in my head, but I think what happened on Earth is that Earth had some kind of security system, and when the Butler virus shut down all the computers, the security system on Earth was like locked down, and it has made Earth completely inaccessible. And anyone who tries to approach Earth can't land on Earth. There's some kind of automated defensive system that just blasts any ship that comes close, because the computers are capable of doing that. But apparently, because of some security feature, Earth has automatically been locked down and can't be opened up again because of the Butler virus. So Earth is just locked up. And, you can't even, use telescopes or radar or anything to see what's going on there because there's some kind of fucking shielding or something. I don't know. So Earth is a mystery. And ever since the Butler virus hit, no one has been able to get in there. And no one knows what's happening on Earth. And they don't call it Earth anymore. They just call it the Marble. Because they call Earth the blue marble. So I think calling it the Marble is fun. And no one knows what's happening in there. And I want, at some, climactic, possibly final Jackson Space Boot story, I want Jackson to go to Earth and to unlock it. And to open up Earth and return to Earth and find out what's been going on there all that time. I think that'd be super cool. I also like the idea that Jackson's father is on Earth, but that doesn't necessarily make sense with the timeline, because I think the Butler virus hit like 100 years ago. Except, well, no, because, I like the idea of Jackson's Grunkle being around for like the heyday of like, development of Lucy from Earth. So maybe the Butler virus happened like 20 years ago, like when Jackson was a baby. And so humanity's only just starting to get their shit together after the virus. Yeah, I need to work out the timeline, but that's those are some of the thoughts in me head about the world building, which I think is all going to be really fun. But I need to stop getting distracted by that and focus on what's actually going on the story now. Because this is as far as I've written the chapter up to. So all that's actually happened so far is that Jackson and these mercenaries have infiltrated this secret lab on this distant moon, and they're trying to rescue Jackson's brother. And they have discovered, to their surprise, that there's this mad scientist in the lab who's turning people's brains into computers. And what we need to do from here is rescue Tiller. And so what we're going to discover is that Dr. Gordon has been using these kids' brains in order to do his research and to create these sort of biological synthetic computers. And I think Tiller is, in some grotesque way, he's like partway through the process of like being turned into this synthetic brain material, because Gordon is like perversely just basically like melting down these kids' brains to like experiment with turning them into computers and like combining them and doing all these different things. And he's done it to himself, and he's made himself into this immortal sphere of like brain goo. And he's done something similar to Tiller, except Tiller was like a prototype who was made before Gordon did it, before Gordon like perfected the process. So I think the limitation with Tiller is that Tiller, he has been turned into this little brain sphere, but he's not immortal like Gordon is. He's got a limited amount of time that he can like run, so he can stay inactive. He can stay like turned off, and he can't do anything. He's like frozen. Or Jackson can turn on his little brain sphere, and then he can run. He can actually talk and interact and speak, and he is himself. But he's only got like an hour of juice left in him. He's only got like an hour of life. And Jackson can turn it on and off whenever. So when she needs Tiller, she can talk to him and switch him on for a bit, or she can switch him off. And so it's this horrible, horrible situation of like, her brother is like not quite dead. He's sort of perpetually in the process of dying. Her brother only has an hour left, and he will spend those minutes when Jackson chooses. It's really fucked up. So that's what happens after Jackson rescues Tiller from the facility. And the other thing that needs to happen is that someone gets shot with one of these sleeper guns. And the mercenary Merc has told Jackson that these are non-lethal stun guns. But as it turns out, when you use them, they can kill people, actually, because Merc didn't want to risk it, and he's full of shit, and he's morally gross. And we have spent a lot of time building up Merc as this, like, scary figure, this inhuman character. So there needs to be a payoff there. Merc needs to do something scary to justify all the build-up, and I'm not totally sure of what that should be yet. I think what I want to happen is the conflict, like, all right, so what I want to happen, like, we've got this Smitter character who I haven't really explained, but he's like the sort of assistant to Dr. Gordon. He's the sort of Igor character. And I think at one point Gordon's brain sphere gets inserted into Smitter's head so that Gordon can control Smitter unwillingly, which is like some horrifying Frankensteinian thing. And then there's some kind of fight between like the Gordon Smitter monster and the mercenaries or something. And someone sort of gets in the way, or like the feathered girl tries to... Yeah, I mean, here's what should happen. Like the feathered girl, Feathers tries to stop the mercenaries from capturing Dr. Gordon, who is in the body of Smitter. Um, so Jackson shoots Feathers with the sleeper stun gun, not realizing that the stun gun can actually be lethal. Because, of course, like, you know, any kind of stun gun, if you're talking about, like, tranquilizers or if you're talking about, like, a taser, the problem is that if you're trying to inflict enough force to knock someone out, it needs to be enough force to knock someone out, but not so much force as to kill them. And that's a really fucking difficult thing to get the dosage right, you know? And if someone is, like, a bit smaller or a bit weaker or has a heart condition, so, you know, maybe Feathers has a heart condition, and so when Jackson shoots Feathers with the stun gun thinking that it'll be harmless, it kills her. And so Jackson feels horribly, horribly, horribly guilty for killing this innocent girl. You know, she was trying to save her brother, but she ended up killing someone else's sibling, you know? Like, Feathers should have a sibling. And maybe one day Jackson meets Feathers' sibling and has to explain, I'm so sorry, I killed your sibling. That would be so horrible. And so that's part of why Jackson is so against violence and against lethal violence throughout the series. So I think that's sort of the scuffle that happens. And again, like, I don't love that violence is the climax, but I think that it sort of works as Jackson's backstory in this case. So yeah, I think that is what's gonna happen. And then Jackson is gonna leave, and she'll have her brother in like this weird brain form, and she'll have the guilt of having killed Feathers, and that'll sort of carry with her as sort of this defining trauma in the rest of her story. Okay, so I think we're gonna wrap up now. Bill in the chat says, I'm really liking the idea of a literal computer virus, a virus that is a computer, silicon-based life form attacking the computer chips directly. Yeah, maybe it's got a sort of a physicality to it. I mean, I think like part of the mystery of the Butler virus is that it's everywhere. It has affected every computer in every human world across the galaxy, apparently like instantaneously. And no matter, like, you know, if they try and build a new computer, they can do it in a bunker at the deep in underground, or they can put a Faraday cage around it. Whatever they do to try and protect the computer, the Butler virus always manages to find it. So it seems to be like this omnipresent, inescapable force, which makes it feel even more godlike, you know? It's everywhere all of the time, like a god. So I like playing with that with the Butler virus, and I haven't quite decided what exactly it is up to, but there's a lot of cool possibilities. All right, so I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much for participating, everybody. I'm gonna try and finish and like polish this story, or at least like a chapter of this story. I don't think it's going to be very long. I feel like we're probably a third of the way, or even half of the way through this story already. Like, Jackson has gotten into the facility, she's met Dr. Gordon. I think we just need a confrontation where she gets her brother back and some stuff goes down, and then she'll escape. And I think that, and then we sort of set off Jackson's adventures, because, you know, there's all that sort of emotional stuff with her in terms of, I think she's running away from stuff by having her adventures, and this sort of trauma is part of what's going on there. So yeah, I think this will be a cool story, and I'm thinking that once it's done, I might record the story onto a tape of some kind. No particular reason, but I'll probably record this story onto a tape, and then we'll see what happens from there. So it'll be exciting, it'll be good. We've never finished a story on Martin Cordial yet. But that's the goal here. That's the goal, is to finish a story. So I'm looking forward to getting Jackson's Nightmare out there. Thanks so much for joining in, everybody. And I'll see y'all next time.